I had been awake for nearly 30 hours straight, watching screens light up with red alerts from every corner of the globe. New York, London, Tokyo, one by one, they were falling under a coordinated cyberattack. My team and I were the only line of defense, typing through fatigue, trying to hold back a digital flood that threatened billions of dollars in transactions. The room was tense. Every second felt like a lifetime. And then, without warning, the shouting started. The CEO stormed in, red-faced, slamming his fist against the conference table. He didn't ask for updates. He didn't want solutions. He pointed at me, the person who had built the very system still holding together, and said the words I'll never forget. "You're done. Get out." Imagine that fired in front of your colleagues, not after the crisis, not in private, but in the middle of the war room while alarms were still blaring. My badge was cut off instantly, my access revoked. It was as if 15 years of sacrifice had just been erased with a single command. People looked at me with a mix of shock and silence, but no one dared to speak. In that moment, I wasn't just dismissed. I was erased, like I had never mattered at all. And the question kept echoing in my mind. Why would they destroy their own defenses by removing the architect in the middle of the storm? Before I tell you what happened next, where are you listening from? Have you ever been treated like you were disposable, no matter how much you gave? Leave a comment if this brings something to mind. Your story might be the one that helps someone else feel less alone. 15 years. That's how long I gave to that company. 15 years of late nights, missed holidays, birthdays celebrated over cold takeout at my desk. I built the systems that kept their empire running. I trained every junior analyst who walked through those doors. My fingerprints were on every layer of protection that shielded them from disaster. I wasn't just an employee. I was the architect. The quiet presence in the background who made sure nothing collapsed, who held everything together while others took the credit. And for all those years, I told myself it was worth it, that loyalty would mean something, that sacrifice would be noticed. But loyalty, I learned, is often invisible. No one cheers when disaster doesn't happen. No one applauds the night you stop a breach before it spreads. They only notice when something goes wrong. And when it did, they needed someone to blame. I think back to the weekends I stayed behind, the moments I told my family just one more hour. That hour turned into whole nights. My daughter once asked me, "Daddy, why do you love your computer more than me?" She laughed when she said it, but I heard the weight behind those words. I carried that with me. Still, I believed it was all for a greater purpose, so that one day all those sacrifices would be recognized. And yet, in a single morning, 15 years vanished. No ceremony, no thank you. Just a black screen on my monitor and a guard escorting me out like I was a stranger trespassing in my own house. Walking through the lobby, I caught my reflection in the glass wall. I looked the same. Tired eyes, worn suit, badge clipped to my chest. But something inside had been ripped away. It felt like I no longer existed, like I had been deleted from my own story. And just when I thought the humiliation had reached its peak, something happened in that lobby that I'll never forget. The elevator doors slid open with a hollow chime, and I stepped into the lobby clutching the box they had given me. 15 years of work reduced to a cardboard container, a framed photo of my family, a few notebooks, a stress ball someone once tossed at me during a late shift. That was all I was allowed to carry out. The security guard walked half a step behind me, silent, but present enough to make it clear I was no longer trusted. My badge dangled uselessly from my chest, the red light on the scanner flashing when I tried to exit. Access denied. The sound echoed louder than it should have, and a few people turned their heads. I felt their eyes on me. Coworkers I had mentored, people whose careers I had helped launch. Some looked away quickly, pretending to check their phones. Others just stared, frozen, unsure if acknowledging me would put their own jobs at risk. Not one of them spoke. Not one of them moved. except for a whisper. A young analyst, barely a year into the job, leaned toward me as I passed and said under his breath, "We trust you, not him." His voice was low, shaky, but it cut through the silence like a blade. For a moment, I wanted to stop to thank him, but the guard's hand on my shoulder reminded me I no longer belonged there. The humiliation was complete, not just being fired, but being erased in public view. The building I had practically lived in for over a decade no longer recognized me. The people I thought of as colleagues were too afraid to look me in the eye, and that single phrase, "access denied," kept repeating in my head like a cruel chant. As the glass doors closed behind me and the city noise rushed in, I realized this wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of something else. Because what they didn't know was that every wall they thought they controlled still carried my signature. And soon enough, they were going to learn what erasing me would truly cost. I hadn't even made it 2 blocks away from the building when my phone buzzed with frantic messages. At first, I ignored them. Colleagues, managers, people who had turned their backs minutes earlier. But curiosity won. I opened one. System locked. No access. Another came seconds later. "We need your authorization. Everything's frozen." I almost laughed, though there was no humor in it. They had fired the only person who could reset the deepest layer of security. The deep lock wasn't just a firewall, it was the final barricade, a system I designed years ago after a close call that nearly cost us billions. It was simple in concept, but brutal in execution. Once triggered, every critical system required my biometric key and my encryption token to restart. No shortcuts, no overrides. It wasn't arrogance that made me design it this way. It was necessity. The company had always looked for cheap fixes, always cut corners. I built something that couldn't be bypassed because I knew one day cutting corners could cost lives. Now, that day had arrived, and the irony was almost poetic. Inside the building, I could imagine the scene. Executives shouting, IT teams scrambling, alarms pulsing across every monitor. The CEO probably barking orders, demanding someone undo the lock, as if it were just another password to reset. But there was no undo button. There never had been. I paused on the sidewalk, staring at the glowing skyline. Part of me wanted to walk away, to let them drown in the chaos they had created. Another part of me still ached with loyalty, still wanted to save the very people who had humiliated me. That war raged inside my chest, sharper than any insult they had thrown. Then another message appeared, short and desperate. "If you don't come back, we're finished." For the first time in 15 years, the power wasn't in their hands. It was in mine. And standing there in the cold air, I realized they had no idea just how quickly things were about to spiral out of control. News travels faster than any virus, faster than any breach. By the time I reached my apartment, the fallout had already spilled into the outside world. My phone buzzed non-stop alerts from financial apps, breaking news notifications, panicked messages from former colleagues. The first headline hit me like a punch. OrionTech stock in free fall after security meltdown. Another followed, trading halted, billions at risk. I stared at the numbers on the screen. 42% down in less than an hour. That kind of collapse doesn't just rattle a company, it rattles entire markets. Pension funds, small businesses, ordinary families with retirement savings tied to those shares. Their futures were suddenly trembling because a boardroom couldn't see past their own arrogance. Inside Wall Street, I imagined traders screaming across the floor, phones pressed to their ears, investors demanding answers no one could give. And behind the scenes, regulators were already circling. The SEC didn't need rumors or leaks. The system itself had reported the truth. The record showed in black and white, lead security architect terminated mid-incident. It was more than just a line in a log. It was proof of negligence. proof that the leadership had cut their own lifeline while the storm was still raging. My chest tightened as I read the updates. Part of me felt vindicated. Finally, the world could see what I had tried to warn them about. But another part of me ached. These weren't just numbers on a screen. I knew the faces behind them. The receptionist who had quietly saved every paycheck, the junior analyst with college loans, the retirees counting on dividends. Their lives were now collateral damage in a war they didn't start. I closed my eyes, listening to the sirens in the distance, wondering if they were for me or for the company unraveling downtown. And as the chaos spread from trading floors to newsrooms, I knew this was only the beginning. Because markets could recover, but reputations, once shattered, they rarely come back. And soon, the people responsible would find themselves trapped in a spotlight hotter than any firewall I ever built. I slipped into a small cafe in Brooklyn, the kind of place where no one asks questions if you sit alone for too long. The world outside was on fire, markets crashing, news anchors shouting over each other. But inside, it was just the soft hum of an espresso machine and the faint clinking of cups. I ordered coffee I didn't intend to drink and found a corner table by the window. For the first time in hours, no one was barking orders at me, no alarms, no flashing screens, just silence. And in that silence, the weight of it all came crashing down. 15 years of sacrifice, a career cut off with a single command. I stared at the steam rising from the cup, wondering if this was what freedom felt like, or if it was just emptiness dressed up as peace. Then my phone buzzed. At first, I thought it was another news alert, but the screen showed an unknown number, no name attached, just one line of text. "You planned this, didn't you?" I froze. My pulse quickened. Planned this? I hadn't lifted a finger after they threw me out. The system was reacting exactly as designed. Yet the wording hit a nerve. Because deep down, wasn't there a part of me that wanted this? That wanted them to feel the sting of their arrogance? I set the phone down, staring at the message as if it could explain itself. Who sent it? A colleague? A rival? Someone watching from the outside who thought I had orchestrated the collapse? The cafe suddenly felt less like a refuge and more like a spotlight. I looked around at the strangers sipping their drinks, each one absorbed in their own world, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, somewhere, was watching me closely. The phone buzzed again, a second message lighting up the screen. I didn't open it right away. My hands hovered, caught between fear and curiosity. And in that moment, I realized the story wasn't just about what they had done to me. Someone else wanted to write a different ending. Back at headquarters, the story they wanted the world to believe was already taking shape. I watched it unfold from the glowing screen of my phone in that Brooklyn cafe. The CEO stood tall behind a podium, flanked by executives who nodded on cue like actors reading from a script. He spoke with a steady voice, the kind meant to reassure investors and calm the public. Our systems are stable, the breach has been contained, OrionTech remains secure. Behind him, giant monitors displayed dashboards glowing green lines of code flowing smoothly, as if nothing had ever gone wrong. It looked convincing. To someone who didn't know better, it was the picture of control. But I knew those dashboards. I had built them. And what I was seeing wasn't live data. It was cached output, a static snapshot designed to buy time. A forgery dressed up as victory. The cameras flashed, reporters scribbled notes, and for a moment, the illusion worked. Stock tickers slowed their fall. Commentators on business channels called it a remarkable recovery. Even some of the employees watching from their desks breathed sighs of relief. But illusions are fragile things, and the more desperate the lie, the faster it cracks. I sat back in my chair, coffee still untouched, and wondered how long it would last. 10 minutes? 20? A lie that bold could only stretch so far before reality tore through it. And when it did, the backlash would be 10 times worse. A part of me wanted to shout the truth right then, to expose the performance for what it was. But I didn't move. I didn't need to. The truth has a way of surfacing on its own. As the applause faded in that press room, another alert buzzed on my phone. This one wasn't from the news. It was from someone inside the company. And what they sent me was about to unravel everything the CEO had just declared. It didn't take long for the illusion to collapse. Barely 10 minutes after the CEO's triumphant speech, the dashboards behind him began to flicker. At first, it was subtle. A delayed update here, a stalled graph there. The audience barely noticed, but I did. My phone buzzed with another message from the inside. Data feed failing, cache emptying. Then, live on camera, the monitors froze. Rows of green indicators blinked out one by one, replaced by a stark red warning, no live connection found. The silence that followed was heavier than any alarm. Reporters glanced at each other, unsure if they were witnessing a glitch or the truth breaking through the mask. The CEO tried to keep talking, his voice louder now, more forced. "We remain in full control," he insisted. But his words sounded hollow against the wall of red flashing behind him. No one in that room believed him anymore. The illusion had shattered, and everyone could see the cracks. News outlets didn't wait. Within minutes, headlines shifted. False recovery exposed. OrionTech dashboard a lie. Stock tickers, which had slowed their descent, plummeted again. This time, there was no climbing back. I sat there in the cafe, phone in hand, watching it all unravel in real time. A strange mix of emotions washed over me. Vindication, yes, but also a deep ache. I had built those systems to protect, not to humiliate. Yet here they were, weaponized by arrogance and collapsing under the weight of a lie. Around me, strangers sipped their drinks, oblivious to the storm raging across the city. I felt like I was watching the end of something monumental, and yet no one around me knew. Another message lit up my phone, short and sharp, bored, demanding answers. "They're looking for you." And that was the moment I realized the real battle wasn't over. It was just beginning. The boardroom was no longer a place of control. It had turned into a crime scene lit by fluorescent lights and flashing screens. I wasn't there physically, but through every insider message, I could picture it clearly. Executives huddled around the long glass table, voices cracking, papers scattered, and in the center, the evidence they could no longer deny. It started with an email, my email, dated 3 weeks before the breach. Subject line, "Critical vulnerability requires immediate action." In it, I had laid out everything: the stress points, the need for redundancy, the importance of keeping the dual signature clause. I even spelled out what could happen if those safeguards were ignored. For weeks, it had been buried, dismissed as too cautious. Now, printed copies sat in front of every board member, highlighted, annotated, undeniable. One director read the line aloud, "Single point authorization introduces systemic risk." The room fell silent. Then came the system logs, automatic, untampered. They showed the exact timestamp of my termination, 9:43 a.m., right in the middle of the attack. 10 minutes later, the lockdown triggered exactly as designed. The logs were brutal in their clarity. They didn't care about politics or image. They just told the truth. The CEO tried to deflect, I heard. Claimed I had sabotaged, manipulated, orchestrated. But the logs betrayed him. They showed no tampering, no external interference. Only a system doing exactly what it was built to do, and a leader reckless enough to fire the one person holding the key. For years, I had fought to be heard, to be taken seriously. In that room, I wasn't there to speak for myself. But my words, my receipts, spoke louder than I ever could. And as the board stared at the paper trail of their own negligence, I knew the tide had turned. Because once the truth is in black and white, there's no covering it with speeches or dashboards. And the next call they were about to receive would make sure the whole world knew it. If the boardroom had been tense, the investor call was a battlefield. By the time the lines connected, the stock had already cratered, and billions had evaporated from portfolios across the globe. On one side of the call, hedge funds, pension managers, sovereign wealth funds. On the other side, a red-faced CEO trying to hold his empire together with rehearsed words and shaky reassurances. It didn't take long before the first voice cut through. "You told us the system was bulletproof," a fund manager from London snapped, "yet your own logs show you fired the architect mid-crisis. Do you expect us to believe this was a coincidence?" Another voice followed, sharper American accent. "We entrusted you with billions. What we see is incompetence, at best, negligence at worst. Who exactly was running this company while it burned?" Every second of that call was recorded, broadcast to analysts, journalists, and regulators. There was no room for charm, no space for spin. Investors don't care about excuses, they care about numbers. And the numbers were damning. The CEO stammered something about temporary setbacks and working solutions. But then came the blow that silenced even him. A representative from a sovereign fund said calmly, "We reviewed the architect's report from 3 weeks ago. Every warning was there. Every safeguard was ignored. The truth is simple. OrionTech's stability was one person, Evelyn Hart, and you cut her out." My name, spoken in that context, hit me like a shockwave. For years, I had been invisible outside the walls of that building. And now, my absence was the headline. My warnings had become their evidence. The call ended with threats of lawsuits, demands for resignations, and one clear message: the money had lost its patience. When investors revolt, they don't argue, they dismantle. Sitting alone in that cafe, I realized the stage was being set, and soon the board would have no choice but to make a move that would change everything. By the time the board convened again, the air was thick with anger and fear. What had once been polite strategy sessions turned into a tribunal. The glossy table where deals were usually signed now looked like a courtroom bench, and the man at the head, the CEO, who had once shouted me out of the war room, was the defendant. He tried to project authority, but even from the grainy live stream I was sent, I could see the cracks. His tie loosened, his face pale, his voice growing hoarse as he repeated the same lines. "Temporary setback, market confidence will return, we acted decisively." But no one was buying it anymore. One director slid a stack of documents across the table. My warnings, my receipts, highlighted in yellow, time-stamped in black and white. "You ignored this. You fired her. And you lied to us," the director said flatly. Another chimed in. "You staged dashboards for investors. Do you realize the liability we now face?" The CEO tried to shout back, claiming sabotage, betrayal, anything to deflect. But his words sounded desperate, stripped of the power they once carried. Every excuse he offered was met with silence, the kind of silence that tells you the verdict is already decided. Finally, the chair of the board leaned forward and said the words that would echo through headlines within the hour. "Effective immediately, your tenure is over. Security will escort you out." I pictured him walking the same path I had, through the lobby, past the glass doors, badge denied at the scanner. The difference was, when I left, I carried my dignity. When he left, all he carried was shame. The irony wasn't lost on me. The man who erased me in front of everyone was now being erased himself, stripped of the authority he had wielded like a weapon. And as news alerts lit up my phone with the breaking headline, I knew the world was watching. But for me, the story wasn't just about his fall. It was about what would rise in its place. In the weeks that followed, the company scrambled to rebuild what it had lost. The CEO's downfall became headline news, dissected on every business channel, cited in case studies about arrogance and short-sighted leadership. Investors moved on. Employees tried to study the ship, but the damage was already done. As for me, I thought walking away would be easy. It wasn't. You don't spend 15 years pouring yourself into something and just forget it overnight. But slowly, the phone calls started. Not from OrionTech, but from others international security consortiums, think tanks, even universities that wanted me to teach the next generation of architects. One afternoon, I stood in a new office far from the glass tower that had once rejected me. On the wall was a simple plaque that read, Evelyn Hart, Architect of Integrity. It wasn't about the title. It wasn't about revenge. It was about being seen, finally, for what I had always brought to the table: loyalty, foresight, and the courage to build things the right way, even when it wasn't popular. Looking back, I realized the fall of that company wasn't really about me. It was about choices. Their leadership chose ego over wisdom, shortcuts over resilience, appearance over truth. And in the end, those choices came with a price. The lesson I carry now is simple. In work, in life, respect matters more than power. You can silence someone, strip them of their title, even try to erase their presence, but you cannot erase the truth of what they've built. Eventually, it will surface. So I'll leave you with this. Have you ever been underestimated or pushed aside, only to realize later that your value was bigger than the space they gave you? Share your story in the comments. You never know. Your experience might be the reminder someone else needs today.